Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Tuesday, and I am happy to be with you once again to bring you another author interview. Hope your week is going well so far. Hubby and I had quite the day. We went out to run an errand that was only supposed to take 2 hours maximum. He said, "Hey, you want to ride with me?" And I was like, "I've got a ton of stuff to do, but sure. It's not going to take that long." 4 years later, we finally got home. It was insane. We went to the first place, and then we had to drive to a second place to check on something, and then back to the first place, and then to a third place, and then back to the first place, and then I don't even know. I lost track after a while of the craziness, and it didn't ever fully get resolved, but we got to spend a lot of time together, and that was nice. It was a beautiful sunny day, but not the day that I was expecting when we got home hours later than we thought we would. But I hope your Tuesday went a little better than that. It meant the rest of the day went well, so I can't complain about that. But I hope overall your Tuesday went well. Let's talk about books, shall we? As I mentioned at the end of the last episode, my guest today is author W.L. Hawkin. She is the author of the Holy Stone Mysteries, but she is also the author of a new series that takes place in a place called Lure, Minnesota, and that is the first book in that series is what we'll be talking about today. Let me go ahead and give you the description from the back of the first book in that series, Lure, subtitled Jesse and Hawk. Hawk is a wounded healer bent on losing himself on the Chippewa Reservation. Jesse's a vegan nature photographer trying to find herself on that same wild land. When Hawk shoots the deer Jesse's photographing, passions flare. Then Jesse hears that Hawk's friend is dying and sets off alone on horseback to warn him. He deserves the chance to say goodbye she never had. But danger lurks everywhere near the small Midwestern town of Lure River. Jesse's just discovered the fragile bones of a missing Indigenous girl in her shed and drawn the unwanted attention of two local men. Can Jesse find Hawk before they find her? Ruby Littlebear's tragic tale weaves through the narrative, reminding us that one moment can change everything. So that is the description of the first book in the series that takes place in Lure River, Minnesota. Again, it is Lure, Jesse and Hawk. Jesse and Hawk, of course, being the main characters here. Both of them are definitely struggling with a lot of things in life, kind of hiding from some things, running from some things, trying to sort through a lot of things. They both have had heartbreak and some not missed opportunities, but they haven't been able to get the closure that either of them needs to move forward. And so they are both out in the kind of the middle of nowhere in Minnesota, figuring things out, and their meet cute, I wouldn't say is exactly cute, because Jesse is photographing the deer. Hawk shoots the deer with an arrow. He lives off the land, so he is obviously utilizing the deer as food and using all of the parts of the deer. But, it's not exactly a meet cute. I don't know what you would call it in that case, but that is how they meet, and then things go from there. There's a variety of different levels happening. There's the body that Jesse finds on the property that she's staying on. There's the fact that Hawk lives in the middle of nowhere and she doesn't know where, and she wants to tell him that his friend is dying, and so she sets off to find him. There are these two very creepy men that keep popping up throughout the narrative, and you're trying to figure out what's going on there. Lots of different things happening as these two try to figure out what's going on, with themselves, both singly and potentially as a couple. So that is a little bit about the series and the first book in the series. Let's go ahead and start the interview with W.L. Hawkin. Again, the book is called Lure, Jesse, and Hawk. Hi, Wendy. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you, Sarah?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Great. Well, we are here to talk about the first book in a new series of yours. But before we get to that, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a little bit, that would be great.
Sure. I'm a proud Canadian writer. I grew up in rural Ontario and moved to the West Coast 25 years ago this coming July for the weather and I suppose for the adventure. We were just talking about moving a little bit, but I basically put everything I owned 25 years ago in a U-Haul with my 14-year-old daughter and a puppy, 6-month-old puppy, and drove to BC not knowing what was going to happen. So that was my adventure part. I love nature. I love animals. I love my yellow dog, which you'll see if you go to my website. There are always yellow dog pictures everywhere. The last few years, I've been working on the Hollystone Mystery Series. And yeah, my new book, Lure, is the first in a brand new series. It's a little bit different and it brings me back home in many ways. So I've really enjoyed it.
I'm just picturing the road trip with the 14-year-old and the dog and a U-Haul that sounds like a really good basis for something like, I don't know if it's a new book or if it's a short story, but.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was like 6 nights in different motels. And we would take off about 6 a.m. before there was traffic and drive about 12 hours and then find a motel to crash for the night. And I had everything in the U-Haul and I had this old Cavalier station wagon and we were super overloaded. So when I was going through the Cascades, my temperature gauge would go into the red as I climbed the mountain, and then it would go down into the green on the other side. And by the time I got to the Peace Arch to cross over into Canada, we were sitting in the lineup, and I could smell smoke. And I looked at like, I hope that isn't us. Well, sure enough, we had blown up the car basically. So there was antifreeze or whatever that's, I don't know cars, but there was all that stuff. It was coming out on the pavement. And there was smoke, and the border crossing guard said, just go. He's like, just get out of here.
I don't want to be responsible for you. Just go.
He's like, while your car is still running, let's get you out of here. So,
wow.
Yeah.
The Cascades are beautiful, but they're no joke for driving.
No, I was not ready for mountains being a rural Ontario girl. So
yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad you made it.
Thank you.
And it's all in the past. So
yes.
You mentioned that the new book is called Lure. Can you give an overview both of the story and because it's going to be a series, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of give an overview of the series as well as this first story in the series.
Well, I don't know what the series is going to be so far, other than it's a small town. And it is set in the American Midwest, so Minnesota, that sort of area. And there's a number of characters and a number of businesses. I actually asked my email list if they could help me create businesses, and I got some really great answers. So I've incorporated those into the book, and that was really fun creating this town. So I really like small towns, so that's where it is. And they are kind of following a romantic suspense genre. So with that genre, you have at the core of it, there is a romance, but then there's another 50% of it that there's all this other stuff going on. So I don't know if you noticed that when you were reading, but that's kind of how a romantic suspense rolls. So things get put in front of the couple and that are dangerous usually, and it's how do they manage and still end up together. Now, Lure is the first one, Jesse and Hawk, is a redemption story, I think, featuring two people who they're both hiding from the world and they're searching for themselves. So they both recently lost their partners. They've gone back to nature and the land seeking something, comfort, solace, healing, growth, and they find that in each other, really. Mm-hmm.
What was your initial inspiration? I know you started writing this book quite a long time ago. So what was your initial inspiration for the story?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I think it reveals my desire at that time for freedom and adventure and romance. So the story there I started writing this. I actually wrote the whole first draft 30 years ago. And I was leaving my ex-husband after 17 years and starting out on my own. And because I had quit high school so young, I had gone back to high school and found my sort of myself in a Native studies, a Native ancestry course. And so I was starting my degree in Indigenous studies and doing a lot of reading at the time, and really breaking free and getting involved in a lot of different spiritual practices, because I'm a very spiritual person. So it was a huge time of transition for me. And I think some of that shows in the book. For sure, at that point, I was meditating a lot, like maybe 2 or 3 hours a day. I was, flat on my back in corpse position. And this book came to me in dreams. So I would wake up in the morning with a scene in my head, and then I would get up and quickly write it all down, type it all on my old Commodore 64. So if you remember the first scene where Jesse's photographing the deer and Hawk shoots it while she's watching it through her camera lens, that's exactly what I dreamed 30 years ago. So I kept that. A lot of other changes, of course, I made, but that's kind of the original kind of meet cute scene for these two. And so I found the manuscript a couple of years ago when I was moving. I do move a lot. I've moved about 25 times, but anyway, I found the manuscript and I read it and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And so I decided to rewrite it, and this is what happened. It took a turn. So as I was rewriting it, I started following what I had typed 30 years ago. And I didn't get very far into it when Jessie finds the bones of the missing Indigenous woman in her shed. And at that point, I said, okay, who is this? Because I don't plan anything. And so I just asked questions. And so I said, who is this? And what's their story? And so Ruby Little Bear showed up and started telling me her story. And so I wrote the whole Ruby Little Bear story and then wove it through. And it just kind of meanders through, but links up with what's going on with Jessie and Hawk at the same time.
All right. Now that you know a little bit more about the book and about Wendy, it is time for our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about Jessie and Hawk as the main characters of the story, and what you as readers might appreciate about them as the main characters. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with author W.L. Hawkin about the first book in a new series. It is called Lure, Jessie and Hawk. Let's return to the interview. I was actually thinking while you were talking about that first scene where Jessie is photographing the deer. And then at some point you mentioned that she has her grandfather's photography equipment, camera equipment. And I'm like, oh, is that because it was actually the equipment that she would have had 30 years ago and you just had to update that scene?
Oh, that's a good, no, but I did actually 30 years ago have an old Nikon, and I was taking photography lessons. So probably that's in there on a subtle level. Yeah.
Just, because she's got film and she's trying to figure out where to develop it and everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, for sure. And I was using film in those days.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about Jessie and Hawk and what you think about them as both single characters as well as a couple will resonate with readers?
Mm-hmm. Hawk is interesting for me. He's got that kind of Thoreau vibe going on, where he's living in a cave in the bush, and he's been there for 3 years, which is a very long time to live in a cave with a wolf. And he's there for a reason. He's really overwhelmed by the guilt of his partner. He feels responsible for it. He's really down on himself, and he doesn't want to hurt anybody else. So he's afraid of relationships. And I think that people might be able to resonate with that. Like if you've gone through a difficult relationship and you feel responsible for something that happened, and he almost feels like, I don't want to say a jinx, but he almost feels like he doesn't deserve a relationship, or if he does get with somebody, he might hurt them, and he's afraid. And so he has to kind of get through that fear. So that's a big one with him. I really like him, and he developed so much more when I was writing this time around, and all his spirituality really shines through there. Jessie is kind of interesting. She's got a kind of a side like me too, in that she's very independent. She's impulsive. She doesn't know how impulsive she is. She kind of realizes at some point that, oh my gosh, I am actually doing things that are as impulsive as my ex. And she's creative. She's a risk taker, and she's really searching for herself. So could be a little bit of me in there, I suppose.
Well, that is usually one of my questions of, do you include autobiographical elements within your writing? So maybe not intentionally.
Well, for sure with Jessie, I have always wanted to live in a cabin in the bush. I've been talking about this forever, and I haven't quite made it, but I sure would like to. And I spent my childhood riding my horse through the trails in the bush and swimming in creeks. And so I have all those experiences that she has, like with her and the horse, that's pretty much me and the horse. So that's autobiographical for sure. And with Hawk, I very much understand him, because I always felt like I was born in the wrong century to the wrong parents. And for me, when I got to that point, when I was sitting at my kitchen table having this course in Native ancestry, and I suddenly went, oh my gosh, this is who I am. I understand this. It was like I was searching for myself all the time, and I found it in Indigenous studies, and he did too. And I think that part of him and that part of me are very much the same. Mm-hmm.
So obviously your studies kind of influenced some of the themes of the book. What other kinds of research did you do for the story?
How to skin and butcher a deer. that was
very definitive right off the bat.
I mean, there was a time in my life where, I did some things like that. I remember being somewhere and somebody had hunted this deer and brought it back to where I was living, and it was in a bathtub because they thought I wanted to. they thought I wanted to work with the flesh.
Oh, geez.
I know.
In the
So I was doing,
Okay.
yeah, well, it was soaking.
Right.
So I was doing things like that, but how to butcher a deer, I didn't know how to do that. I hadn't actually ever done that before, but I had a really interesting book called Wildwood Wisdom that I was using to look up all those kind of bushcraft things. So there is that that's an interesting side of this book is the survivalist techniques that are incorporated in there. The bush medicine that he uses, I mean, he's a very creative guy, and when he has to kind of adapt how he's going to, sew up her wound when she gets hurt. I'll leave that to people to read, but it's kind of interesting how he pulls that off. And first aid, I mean, I'm not a doctor, so he is a doctor. And so I had to look up a lot of things about how would he treat her, what would he give her when he finally got her to an actual clinic, how would that go? The spiritual Anishinaabe teachings were something, I didn't research them so much as I was actually learning them as I was in school and university. So they're in there. And also there's a whole piece around missing and murdered Indigenous women that I wanted to bring forward. And that's something that's really close to my heart. Mm-hmm. And one of the young women who actually read this book and gave me a quote, Alexa Blyan, she is amazing. She's 18 and she's working with people to try and have them tell their stories on a project called Digital Voices, because in telling our stories, there's healing. And I watched one of the speaking engagements that she did, and she came out on the stage and she was talking about her fear of being able to walk a block to the 7-Eleven after dinner, like in the dark, because so many people she knew had been taken. So many girls had been taken. Mm-hmm. So many women had been taken. And I can't even fathom what that must be like to have that fear, that predominant, but this is what a lot of Indigenous women live with. And it's a horrible thing. And we need to do something about that.
Yeah. I grew up in Montana, and I'm grateful now with the advent of like the internet and social media, because I think there's more light being shown on that, because growing up, I wasn't aware of how many Indigenous women went missing every year. But I think with the ability to post, this person is missing, this person, and mm-hmm. telling people's stories, I think that's helping to make it more prevalent and like I said, shining a light on the issue.
Well, for sure. And our culture has made it okay. And nothing happens to these, I'm going to say men, because I don't think other women take Indigenous women, rarely, unless they're maybe working with a man. But they've got away with it for so long that it's something that they think they can do. Mm-hmm. And that's a horrible, horrible attitude that we really need to change. I like that shows like Longmire has done work on that. Mm-hmm. And there was another movie I just watched. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it'll come to me. But that was really highlighting that too.
Yeah.
And that we need to really look at that and do something about it. So that's kind of what Ruby Little Bear is doing, even though her story is not, well, it's sad and it's tragic, but it's not the same kind of expectation we think of, right, when we think of what happens to missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here so we can take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking more about character development in Wendy's writing. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author W.L. Hawkin. When it comes to your characters, you said that you don't plan anything, so you're definitely a pantser. But how about character development? Do you have a basic idea of characters when you start writing, or do you really let those characters come to you as you write?
I really let them come to me. And most of the time they come pretty fully loaded, but then as I'm working, because I don't outline really at all, the characters will develop. Now, Sam's character, Sam in the first book had a very small role. Sam and Ira, they were in the first draft 30 years ago. But with this book, as I started writing them, Sam turned into something else. And I'm really glad of that. And he surprised me. And I think he surprised himself, and he's really developed. I didn't make him develop; that just kind of happened. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I'm not really. I don't know how to explain this. I guess I'm a pantser. I don't like that term pantser. I say I'm an intuitive writer because I do.
That sounds better. Yeah.
Yeah, I
it's
do.
Just not as catchy.
Yeah, I think with pantser, it makes me feel like, oh, she's flying by the seat of her pants and she has no idea what she's doing. But
right.
My spirit knows what I'm doing and my muses know what we're doing. And so I give them free rein on that. And I still use that meditation technique a lot. So I will go to bed and say, well, what happens next? And I will wake up going, oh, okay, that's what's going to happen now. Yeah, so it's interesting how they develop. I think Sam might actually take a more key role in another book. Mm-hmm. And of course, his father, yeah.
I so want to make a comment, but I don't want to give anything away.
He has some father issues.
He has some issues. I was really hoping that something had happened that didn't end up happening.
Well, there's another book coming. So
yes. So, and speaking of that book and the characters, I assume that we will be seeing some of the characters from this book in the rest of the series. But do you know the main characters of the next book, or can you tell us anything about the story?
I do, but I'm so hazy about how I do things. I don't really want to come out and say, oh, it's going to be about this one and that one. Although they're nudging me, and when they start nudging me, it's because they want a key role. And so I will probably go with that. And we'll see how that plays out.
And I assume that you don't probably have a fixed number of books in mind, that you're kind of letting the series take you where it will. So in terms of an overall arc, or are you just going to write until you feel like you've told the story?
No, I'll just keep writing when I need to. And I mean, I have a lot of other projects going at the same time. So I'm not going to sit down and write Lure for the next 4 or 5 years. I've got a few other things happening, and we'll see. We'll see where it comes.
Are those writing projects or other types
Yeah.
of projects? Yeah.
Yeah, they're writing projects. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is not your first series, the Hollystone series. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So the Hollystone series, I started quite a long time ago. And I was actually working as a high school teacher, which an introvert should never, ever do. It's just not really healthy for you.
No.
And yeah. And then I was teaching, high school English, which was very, very stressful. I mean, I love the teaching part, but there were too many bodies and there was just too much energy coming at me all the time. So I would come home on weekends and holidays. And because I'm such an introvert, I just kind of hide a lot and, write in my room. So I started writing To Charm a Killer really as a stress release. And so that series is about a coven of witches in Vancouver who solve murder mysteries. And as that one progressed, there are now four of them in that series. At the end of the fourth book, I realized, this is really about Estrada, who's kind of the key character. And it's more of a, what do we call it? There's a word for it, but it's like when you have not so much a series, but you follow the one character through. And so he's constantly, in each book, he goes to a different place to save somebody he cares about. So in the first book, he ends up in Ireland trying to save this young girl who's got caught up in their charm when they charm the killer. And the killer has followed her to Ireland, and Estrada goes there to try and save her. And in the second book, he goes to Scotland, where another fellow from the coven has been sleeping with the stones. That's what it's called. And he's been charged with murder. And so Estrada's trying to find out who really committed the murder so he can get his friend out of jail. And so that one is a murder mystery. The third one is, okay, while he's in Scotland, his friend Michael is upset that he's away and he gets in trouble with a vampire. And so in the third one, the vampire steals Estrada's baby in this kind of revenge thing. And so they all end up on a yacht traveling up the BC coast to get Estrada's baby back. And it's pretty interesting. And the fourth one is a time travel back to prehistoric Ireland, where they go to save an archaeologist that's a friend of theirs. So it really, there's a lot of movement. I like to travel. So there's a lot of movement in there to try and save people. And it follows like that. Now that series is not finished. Mm-hmm. So Estrada is one of those guys, like I've kind of said to him, you need to like back off and let me finish these other projects that I started. So, because otherwise that's what will happen. Like a couple of times I've been started on one of these projects and then all of a sudden he's there going, hey, no, you really need to write this. And that's what happened the last time is I stopped writing a project called Ghostlight to write To Kill a King. And then after To Kill a King, I said, okay, stop. I need to finish this book because I don't like having unfinished projects, just hanging around. So Ghostlight is actually finished almost. The whole first draft, or not first draft, the whole draft is finished. I've been through it a few times. And it's ready to go into revision. So that will be coming out probably next. And Ghostlight is kind of fun. It's a paranormal mystery with a bit of a romance in there. And it is set at a lighthouse on Vancouver Island that I worked at. Yeah, in 2014. Mm-hmm.
I love listening to people describe either books that they've written or books that they've read that are maybe in the fantasy genre or the paranormal genre, because there's no easy way to describe books like that don't sound just a little bit crazy. And I love that because I mean, I love the genre, but you're like, and then there's this vampire and there's a yacht and a baby. Like, I love that.
Well, yeah, and for sure. I mean, and I hate writing in one genre, which you've probably noticed by now. Mm-hmm. And so I'm always mixing up my genres, which is kind of why I ended up being an indie publisher, because right. Agents and publishers hate that.
Right.
And they don't know what to do with you. And if they can't market you in a certain place, they don't want to know, because they just don't know what to do with you. And if I can't sell that, what am I going to do? Right.
Right.
So with Ghostlight, it's pretty interesting because it really is a murder mystery. But the girl, when she goes through this trauma, her mother's committed suicide 4 years before, and they've had to leave the lighthouse where she grew up. And then on the anniversary of her mother's suicide, her father dies, and he leaves a note saying that he actually pushed her mother. Her mother didn't commit suicide, and that he wants her to go back to the lighthouse and find her mother's journals so she understands what happened. And that's kind of a huge trauma that, you've lost both parents.
Yeah, and terrible parenting, geez.
Yeah, and what's worse is a mother that commits suicide or a father that killed your mother. And so what happens for her is this kind of latent ability to be a medium happens. And so she's dealing with, all of a sudden, she can see ghosts and she can hear ghosts and she can smell, sense that she knows they're there. And I've done mediumship work, so that was a lot of fun. And so that one is kind of will be the next one that comes out. Mm-hmm.
Fun. And I'm sort of fascinated with lighthouses, so that's kind of a fun setting to place that at. It's time for our final break of the podcast, but I will say that, as I was saying, that sounds like an interesting, fun place to set a novel, which I do think. I was realizing that I don't think I've ever actually been to a lighthouse or seen a lighthouse in person. How weird is that? I got to put that on my list of things to accomplish soon, because I like lighthouses. I think they're cool. I am fascinated by the history of them and how they operate, and I need to go to one. So that's something that I will go contemplate while we take a break. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast. Time to hashtag everything. We talk about all the fun, crazy stories on social media. From Instagram to Facebook, Twitter to Tumblr, or probably even Friendster. Join us each week as we explore the quirky side of social media. It's the Golden State Media Concepts social media podcast.
It's simple, such a sad song. The one that we rely on to get us.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author W.L. Hawkin. So it sounds like you've been writing for a long time in various capacities, but what made you finally decide to write for publication?
I know. I think I just got to a point where I had written 2 or 3 novels, and I thought, let's see what I can do with this. And so I wrote To Charm a Killer, and I ran it by a few people. And then like I said, it's so like too many genres. So some people were interested. Some people were like, no, we don't know what to do. So I put it out as an indie. And then in 2016, I re-released my whole series with new covers as the tattoo editions. So the Hollystone Mysteries are all of the cover art are tattoos worn by the characters in the books. And that was a lot of fun to do. Yeah. So that I decided I would just do it myself. And then the more that I learned about publishing as an indie, the more I really enjoyed it. It's a great way to go, especially if you like doing things that are a little bit strange and off the beaten path.
Sure.
And and I've learned a lot along the way. There are drawbacks to it for sure, but there's a lot of work because you're wearing so many hats.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't given up the idea that at some point I might traditionally publish either.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there are enough authors out there that write across genres that there needs to be better categories for traditional publishing. This isn't new and it's not going away. So I'm assuming it'll change at some point, but right now it has to be really frustrating.
It is for sure. And I mean, things like I was just looking at, getting a grant for another project that I want to work on. And it's kind of a creative nonfiction family history, researching my Indigenous ancestor. And so I'm looking at grants and things like that. And for a lot of them, they exclude indie authors. And that bothers me because I feel like there's something there that, if you're an indie author, you're not as good as another writer, which I know is not the case because I know lots of indie authors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course there's going to be writers that aren't that great. And in both ways of publishing, right? You read some
mm-hmm.
traditionally published books and think, okie dokie, this person got published, this person didn't. Okay. I don't know how this works.
Well, for sure. And then you've got really, really small presses. So you might have a small press that they publish four authors or 2 authors or something like that. But that person is considered traditionally published. And I'm like, well, how am I not okay if they are okay?
Right.
So that's a little bit of a bee in my bonnet at this point. Contests are the same. A lot of contests, they don't want indie authors either. You have to kind of go to indie author contests. And I just think it needs to open up and there needs to be more equity in terms of the writing and
mm-hmm.
Not just based on who publishes you.
Right. I think it'll change. It just won't probably change as fast as we would like it to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
From your own experience, do you have advice for aspiring authors?
Sure. Well, I would say, my technique that really works well is meditation. And how it works is that when you write, if you're writing from your alpha or your beta brain and those brain waves are going, that's kind of the monkey mind. And that's, I think, where people get a lot of writer's block, or they're writing how they think. But if you can get into a deeper level like theta brain, which is your creative center, you can really go deep. And that is where I try and go. And you can get there by meditation. And so I would suggest that people try that and do that and write from your heart and soul and ask your muses to help you. And then you need to go into your head and actually, put on the other hats and let your head take over, get eyes on your work, listen to the feedback, use a good editor, and really read the genres for your style and voice and technique. Like the more you read, the better you're going to write as well. So there's a few different things in there, but that's kind of what I think are the important pieces.
Mm-hmm. And when you take the time to read, especially just reading for yourself, what are your go-to authors and genres?
Right. Well, I read mystery and adventure. I like history sometimes, historical novels, and I really like Westerns. I think that might come through in Lure, because to me, Lure has a Western vibe to it. It's not exactly a cowboy story, but it's a kind of a modern Western, right? So, I like Larry McMurtry, Lonesome Dove, Longmire. I like a Métis author from Canada called Cherie Demeline, who is fantastic, and she's got some really great books out. But then I also go to Britain and I read Ellie Griffith's Archaeological Mysteries. I read urban fantasy sometimes because I like the whole sense of myth and magic. So I read Charles DeLint, who's Canadian, and Holly Black. I really like Holly Black's take on urban fantasy. So I have a really mixed bag, just like how I write, I guess.
No,
Yeah.
that makes sense. I would expect you to be, since you write in different genres, I would expect you to read in different genres. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A while back, you mentioned your yellow dog, and that the dog appears on your website. So if you could share your website as well as any social media that people can interact with you.
Sure. The best place to find me is bluehavenpress.com. And all the books are on there, and my dog is on there. And then I have an awful lot more personal stuff on my Instagram account. And on Pinterest, I have a lot of boards about my books. So you can go and you can see pictures that I've grabbed that remind me of things in my books. If you want to kind of get into my head in that way, and you like visual stuff. And I have a Twitter account and I have a Facebook page. So you can find all of those through bluehavenpress.com.
All right. Thank you. We have talked about the books and a variety of different things, but is there anything that we haven't touched on during our time together that you would like to highlight?
I don't know. I mean, I never know what I'm going to write or where it's going to go. That's really, I guess, a lot of my personality. And I'm a feeler. So I'm an INFP personality, which is kind of interesting. If you know anything about Myers-Briggs, you'll understand what that means.
I'm an ISFJ.
Okay.
So, yeah,
okay.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So introverted, intuitive, feeling, perceiving is where I am. And your sensory judging. Yeah.
Yeah. Which sounds bad. People always think
it does.
They're like, judging. It doesn't mean judging, folks.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yeah. But because I'm a feeler, I feel everything. So if something doesn't feel right, I won't do it. And I really trust my intuition to do that. And so if a project takes hold of me, I just kind of go with it. And I love to just go really deep into something. And as I say, finding my Indigenous ancestor that my mother told me about while I was doing my degree, she was 75 at the time, and said, "Oh, by the way, my great grandfather married an Indian." And I said, "What?"
Right.
What?
It wasn't acceptable to talk about for a long time.
Yeah. So why am I hearing this now? Anyway, so I have been looking, for years. I've been doing this ancestry work, and I did find a whole branch of the family that said, yeah, that's true. And here's her picture, and here's her name. And so I'm really trying to bring her to life.
Yeah.
I feel like that she deserves that. And so I'm working on that. So other than that, yeah, you never know.
Well, the P part of your personality, definitely. Now I have this whole thought in my head of just the way, the way you write, and the P part of your personality makes sense to me. But now I'm thinking, now I want to know all the Myers-Briggs letters for my authors that I've talked to see if that corresponds to how they write. That's a good idea. I actually use those sometimes, like when you talk about character development, but with Estrada, because Estrada is an extrovert and he's a performer and a magician, and he hates being alone. He's kind of the opposite of me. He's a lot like some people I have dated in my life. So I could get some of him from that and just the way he presented himself. But I also did go through and read about the different extroverted types and give him letters. I can't remember exactly what they are right now, but it's basically the day of the performer. And so you can use those in your writing as well as finding out
what people are. I think it's fascinating. I only know one other INFP writer, and she and I connected, like she's from Texas, and we connected, and it was pretty interesting because we are similar in a lot of ways.
Well, sure. We kind of got off subject, but I like it. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, not only about the books, but about, Myers-Briggs personalities and other things. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you once again to Wendy for joining me to talk about Lure, Jesse and Hawk. I was actually just laughing a little bit because I was thinking back to the part in the interview when Wendy was talking about somebody had left her a deer hide soaking in water when she was talking about what kinds of research she did for this book. And in my brain, for some reason, I knew she said deer hide, but in my brain, I thought they left a whole deer. And, I grew up in Montana, so deer in pickup trucks, deer hanging in garages after hunting. That's one thing. But I thought somebody had left the entire deer in the bathtub for her. And my brain just would not move off of that image, which was quite disturbing. So I'm really happy to know that it was just the deer skin, and that they thought she might want to work with that. But yeah, anyway, I just sort of went away for a moment there in the interview as my brain did strange things. Anyway, thank you, Wendy, for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. I so appreciate you and hope that you will join me for the next interview, when we will be turning our attention to a memoir this time that is written by Tasha Keeble. The book is called Call Me Freedom, A Black American Woman Breaks from Empire. Again, that is a memoir, and she'll be joining me on the next interview. So please do tune in for that episode. If you are a fan of this podcast, it really does help if you like, subscribe, follow, do all those good things, leave a review, follow on social media, tell me what you're reading, let me know what authors you've read that I've been talking to, or if you've discovered new authors from some of the interviews that we've done. I just love to hear from readers. So like, subscribe, follow, etc., etc. And thank you so much for doing so. If you've already done so, thank you in advance for doing so. If you are about to do so, I just said do so way too many times in that sentence. Thank you again for joining me. Please join me for the next episode. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I hope that week, as always, affords you plenty of time to get lost in a good book.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.